Hello, friends. This is Jim with Science Talk. I have a story involving our avian friends. And basically, this has to do with the number of insects available for birds. Basically, insect numbers are dwindling, they're decreasing worldwide. And simply put, there's not enough insects, not enough number of insects to feed all the birds that feed on insects. So in other words, this could threaten the survival of some bird species, including ones, ironically, that are essential for controlling pests. So scientists have calculated a very important measurement, and it may be considered small, right? But it is an important portion of the overall global energy budget. And they have established an estimate for the annual consumption of insects by birds of the world. It's simple. There are around 10,700 different species of birds, and the mass of birds, flying around, wading and swimming, waddling, what have you, basic locomotion that birds do. So the mass of the birds, not number, but the mass, at any one time is an estimated 4 million tons. 4 million tons of bird biomass worldwide. Of these, the insect-eating birds, the estimate is gross to scale at 3 million tons. In other words, 75% of the total mass of birds worldwide are insectivores. And these birds, be it in the forest, lands, towns, you name it, wherever they're found, they will devour 400 to 500 million tons of insects every year. That's the estimation these scientists have arrived at. So, taken together, all the birds of the world will together consume as much energy, and think of what insects provide. They have oil, they have chitin, which is what makes up the exoskeleton. There are calories that are consumed. Okay? There's nowadays when scientists are discussing energy, we move away from calories. We don't really use that term, that measure. We use joules. Okay? So we use joules as the unit to measure energy. And so when you take this all together, the birds are consuming as much energy as large cities such as New York City. Just to kind of give you an idea of how much energy birds themselves require. So with that one calculation, the researchers have filled in a very big part of the picture. They've placed a value on the role of birds as pest controllers. They have calculated the bird-insect portion of the global food chain. They have illuminated a section of the continuous traffic of energy through the biosphere. The traffic, if you will, the energy flow, to be more technical, that begins with sunlight, the chlorophyll in the plant leaves, the plant cells, plant growth, primary productivity, that then leads to secondary, tertiary productivity and consumption, all the way to the death and decay, recycling of the nutrients of not just the top predators, but all consumers in between. So having this information, conservationists, biologists, ecologists, ornithologists, they will then have an idea of how the avian and insect life are put together, the complexity, the mosaic, if you will. They can then make more accurate estimates of the hazard bird species face, partly through human activities, altering natural ecosystems, such as clearing forests, burning grasslands, those kind of things. And of course, warming the planet. Birds are an endangered class of animals because they are heavily threatened by deforestation, intensification of agriculture, the spread of pesticides. Domestic cats, domestic cats kill a lot of birds. Uh, Collisions with man-made structures, birds flying into buildings, into windows, into any tall structure that's in the middle of the prairies. You got this tall tower, and they fly into it. Things like that. And this is a statement from Martin Neifeller of the University of Basel in Switzerland. He was the lead author, along with his colleagues, in the report of this report that appears in the journal The Science of Nature. If these global threats cannot soon be resolved, we must fear that the vital ecosystem services that birds provide, such as the suppression of insect pests, will be lost. They calculated the energy budget in joules for the globe's bird population, basing their calculations on what could be known from more than 100 studies of the feeding habits of sample birds in a range of different habitats, from the tundra to the tropics. Numerous studies by conservation scientists, climate scientists, are always trying to resolve the minutiae, the fine detail, and as well as then keeping an eye on the big picture, perhaps extrapolating to the overall scheme of things. Earlier this year, researchers took another look at how, purely in terms of carbon, from the atmosphere's carbon dioxide, the share of biomass is distributed across the spectrum of living organisms. How much carbon is locked away in forests, flowering plants, how much is in the form of animal life, and then how much of that animal life takes the form of mammals, mollusks, humans, name your creature, right? So in other words, what they're doing is they're looking at the total amount of carbon. We are based on carbon. Okay? All our molecules that make us up, be it carbohydrates, nucleic acids, protein, you name it, have carbon. The main carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen are the major elements, with some trace such as sulfur and phosphorus, but it's mainly carbon. So they're looking at the biomass of carbon worldwide, and then they're saying, okay, how much is found in different types of plants, how much is found in different types of animals, organisms, heterotrophic organisms. That's what they've done. So other studies have tried to look at insect life in particular, and the planet's social insects alone could weigh in at 700 million tons. And then the estimates of how the insects are coping with change, and the answer is not well. One study found that insect species face a calamitous habitat loss, another that even ubiquitous insects could be put at risk by climate change, and a third that the sheer mass of flying insects could be in severe decline, as we've seen in some parts of Europe. And many of the world's birds, as well, because they depend on the insects, could also be in a great risk of having their numbers greatly reduced. And not only that, not just from the declining number of insects, but shifts in the climate. I've done stories for you guys where the timing, birds time their reproductive cycle so that the chicks hatch out when the insects are blooming, and so that the parents could grab a whole pile of insects and feed it to the chicks. Well, now the insects are emerging a little earlier, and the timing for the birds, when they're laying their eggs and hatching the eggs, they miss the peak of the insects, and therefore they're not able to get sufficient numbers of insects to feed their chick. So we have a mistiming as well that's going on, because warmer temperatures are causing shifts in the timing of various life cycles. So, returning back to Professor Neifeller's et al. Studies, The latest study sets a value on birds as protectors of forests and croplands from insect pests. Woodpeckers, as an example, suppress bark beetles. Songbirds feed their nestlings on caterpillars. Grassland birds control grasshoppers, etc. And again, coming back to the timing of things, especially with the caterpillars. If the caterpillars are emerging earlier and then they pupate or they're in pupa, then those songbirds that feed on them are not going to find them. It's going to be a problem for trying to provide adequate food for their chicks. So Professor Neifeller and his colleagues say for the first time, the predation impact of the insectivorous birds has been quantified on a global scale. Scientists like to deal in quantities and measurements, actual measurements, because then we can calculate what's happening, we can calculate trend, we can then make determinations as to the significance of such measurements, etc. So there's some really interesting things that are happening, and it's such a complex system, this planet, and just slight perturbations in any of the conditions, initial or otherwise, can have drastic ramifications later on. I am working on a story that, here we go again, geoengineering, and I will be having some things to be saying about that. But it all comes down to slight changes, slight perturbations in the initial condition can lead to completely different results. So stay tuned for that particular video segment. And until then, thank you for your time, and we'll talk soon. Hey folks, this is Jim here reminding you to subscribe to this channel, to share my videos, tell others of the work that I do here. I also ask that if you are not already a patron at Patreon, to please consider becoming a patron at Patreon. You can find the information in the description box below the video. I'm asking you to help support the work that I do. I do not take any money from corporations or from any other sources, so the information I share with you is the actual science as it comes out of the peer-reviewed journals. So there is no BS, there's no propaganda, there's no agenda. It's just I present the science and I explain to you what it means, or at least my interpretations of it, based on my own experience as a scientist. I want this channel to grow. I consider, while I discuss many different topics here, you notice I do focus a lot on climate issues. I consider climate change to be the most pressing issue facing humanity today. Thus, I consider it important to disseminate this information to a wider and wider, more and more people. And I need your help to do this. So, yes, please subscribe. Please tell others of the work that I do here. Please share my videos on social media platforms, with your social media groups, what have you. We need to get this information out there. So for those of you who are supporting me on Patreon, I thank you greatly for your support and continued support. It does mean a lot to me. So together we can get this information to more and more people. Thank you. Thank you for your support.